what do we know about temperature? So first, we know that if we heat up a solid, eventually it'll melt, whether it's ice or metal or even rock. And we also know that if we heat up a liquid, it'll evaporate. So common example is water on a pot, on a stove. So the water will evaporate and the steam will rise, which is water in gas form. And finally, we know if we put our hand on something that's very hot or even very cold, it'll hurt. So, to explain these three observations, I want to talk about kind of what is temperature. So, if everything is composed of molecules, then what is temperature doing to those molecules that can explain the three observations and more? Temperature is directly related to the speed of the molecules. So at higher temperature, molecules move faster, and at lower temperatures, molecules move slower. So everything is made of molecules, whether it's solid, liquid, or gas. And all of those molecules, no matter what they have some attraction to each other. So there's a force pulling those molecules together. But some materials will have stronger attractions than others. So if there's attraction between all molecules, if they're moving very slowly, then the I guess the speed of the molecule isn't enough to break free from the attraction between the molecules. So they form a very rigid shape and structure. And if you're wondering why they form a certain rigid shape, then you can think of it as so every molecule, just like objects that we have in real life or like larger objects, molecules have a shape. So those shapes will fit together in certain ways, kind of like Tetris. Um, so um, so if you if you add heat to a solid, those molecules will start moving faster, and at a certain point, although not completely overcoming the forces between each other, they become free from those rigid shapes. So they start to kind of roll around each other, but they stay very close together. So at that point, a solid melts into a liquid. And then, as you could probably deduce, if we cool down that same liquid, the molecules will move slower, and then they'll fall back into those shapes because they can no longer overcome the forces between them. But yeah, if we heat up that liquid instead of cooling it down, then eventually the molecules will move so fast that the forces between them are insignificant. So they fly around freely, and that is a gas. And as I mentioned before, every material has different strength of force between the molecules. So that's the reason that different materials have different melting points and different boiling points. So, for example, something like the gas in the air, like oxygen, carbon dioxide, it's already in gas phase, even at room temperature. Whereas something like rock, it takes a lot of heat to overcome the bonds between the molecules because those bonds are so strong. So although this concept applies to every material, then depending on the strength of the force between the molecules, then it'll require a higher or lower temperature in order to overcome those bonds. So to test this in a very simple way, test the idea that molecules move faster at higher temperatures, there's an experiment we can do. So if you put a drop of food coloring in a hot and cold cup of water, then you'll easily notice that at higher temperatures, then the food coloring will distribute much faster. So that's because the molecules move faster, so they mix together very quickly. And even smell would move faster at higher temperatures, because smell is caused by gas molecules moving from an object to our nose. So if the day is very hot, although it's hard to notice, then smells will actually travel faster to get to you. So now going back to our third point of why hot or cold temperature hurts when we touch it, then we can consider again that molecules at higher temperatures are moving faster. But in a solid, since they're in rigid positions, it doesn't mean that they just don't move until they melt into a liquid. But actually, when you increase the temperature of a solid, the molecules will vibrate more rapidly while still keeping their same positions. So, if the molecules in the pan are vibrating fast and then they contact our hand, then the molecules in our hand will vibrate fast too. So, does that mean that humans will just melt and that's why it causes pain? Well, not exactly. So, actually, the melting point of most materials that make up humans are very high. So melting is not really the concern as much as the proteins inside. So you may have heard about enzymes before. So inside humans there are lots of proteins, and some of those proteins are called enzymes. And enzymes are kind of like little machines that cause chemical reactions to happen inside. So I guess they're important for um, generating energy inside of our cells. They're also important for transporting nutrients across our body, or building structures or breaking old structures. So they're basically important for everything. And something that happens at high temperature is those proteins denature, which means they kind of lose their shape, and their shape is very important for their function. So, so that's why our brain will interpret a signal of high temperature. So, the brain, I guess, our hand will measure that the pan is vibrating really fast. The molecules inside of it, and then it'll send a signal to our brain, and our brain interprets that signal as pain because it's not good for us to keep holding the pan because it'll damage our enzymes. On the other hand, when we touch something very cold, then it also causes pain, but not as fast. And the reason for that is because I guess the main reason that it's dangerous to touch something very cold is that very small ice crystals will form inside of our cells, and those ice crystals are very sharp. And our cells are surrounded by membranes, which are actually quite fragile. So if an ice crystal is growing inside, it can puncture holes inside of the membrane, which is very dangerous, and it can cause irreversible damage because some of our tissues, like nerve cells, can't regenerate. So, yeah, that's about it for our discussion on temperature. So, now you know um, kind of what's happening under the surface. So, if you have different materials and you put them at higher or lower temperatures, you can imagine that these molecules are moving at higher or lower speeds, and that's why our body can interpret those signals and also understand the danger of being exposed to very high or low temperatures. So, and what I would encourage you to do is try the food coloring experiment. It's very easy, and you get to see this concept in action. And also, um, try thinking about some exceptions. Like a very interesting example is when you fry eggs. It starts as a liquid, and when you fry it, it becomes a solid. So why does adding heat to a liquid cause it to become solid instead of causing it to evaporate or causing a solid to turn into a liquid? So it's very interesting. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I guess I'll see you later.